At Thanksgiving, my brother said, "We'll take the lake cabin. You can have the old house. It's prettier anyway." Mom agreed. "It's only fair, he has a family." The room laughed. 2 days later, Mom called terrified. "Why is the lawyer broadcasting the will reading?" "I'm Jack. I'm 33, and up until last Thanksgiving I figured I had a decent grip on my family's odd habits. We weren't the type to hug it out or toss around 'I love you' very often, but we got by just fine. Holidays meant the usual dinners, swapping gifts, and polite chatter about jobs or life updates. I'm the youngest of three. My brother Mark is 38, married with 2 kids, and my sister Jenna is 36, single, and living her best life chasing that influencer glow on Instagram. Growing up, I was always the quiet one, the kid who'd rather have his nose in a book or tinker with some little side project than argue across the dinner table. Maybe that's why people always underestimated me, like I was the one who wouldn't stand up for myself. This Thanksgiving was supposed to be normal. I flew back home, showed up with a bottle of wine, even baked my mom's favorite dessert from scratch. I was ready to just have a calm evening. We gathered around the long oak table, the one that's been in the family for ages, and everything seemed fine until Mark leaned back, smirked, and said, "You can keep the old house. We'll take the lake cabin. It's nicer." I froze, blinking, not sure I'd even heard him right. The house. The cabin? He tossed it out like we were divvying up chairs, not splitting the family's most treasured places. The room went quiet for a second before Mom chuckled and said, "Well, it's only fair since he has a family." Then she gave me that patronizing little head tilt that always meant, "You wouldn't get it." Everyone at the table burst out laughing, like it was the funniest thing in the world. Even Jenna was giggling, phone in hand, probably already cooking up some clever post about family drama at dinner. My fork stalled halfway to my mouth. What hit me wasn't just what they said, but how casual it sounded, like it had already been decided, like they'd talked it over behind my back a dozen times, and now thought it was safe to let me in on the joke. I tried to keep cool and asked as evenly as I could, "Wait, what do you mean by keep the old house?" Mark just shrugged like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You know Mom and Dad's place, right? It just makes sense that I get the cabin. We've got kids, they love it up there. You can have the old place." I looked to my parents. Dad didn't even glance up from carving the turkey, and Mom just smiled that tight smile of hers that always meant don't argue. My stomach churned. The rest of dinner, I barely said a word, just kept replaying what Mark had thrown out there. The cabin wasn't just some building. It was where Dad taught me how to fish, where I spent summers fixing the dock with Grandpa, where I brought my first girlfriend. It was a piece of us. After dessert, I stayed behind to help clear dishes, hoping I'd get a quiet moment to ask Mom or Dad what was really going on. Instead, I overheard them in the kitchen talking to Mark. Mom said, "I'm glad we got that settled. It's only right you get the cabin. Jack will be fine with the house." And Mark added, "Yeah, honestly, I don't think he even likes it up there. This works better." I bit my tongue so hard it hurt. They hadn't just assumed I didn't care. They'd convinced themselves I didn't deserve it. That night, I went home sick to my stomach. I lay awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every time I'd driven up to the cabin alone to patch the roof, mow the grass, or dig out the driveway in winter so Mom and Dad could have their peaceful weekends. I'd put in all that work while Mark stayed in the city and Jenna snapped beach photos for her followers. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was Mom, her voice tight and panicked. "Jack, why is the lawyer streaming the will reading?" I just sat there for a second, heart racing. The truth was, I hadn't told a soul, but I'd already made a call of my own. When she phoned me in that frantic tone, I nearly let it ring out, but curiosity got the better of me. "Streaming?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Yes," she snapped back, words tumbling out fast. "Your father just got an email from the lawyers saying the will reading will be live-streamed for all the beneficiaries. We never agreed to that. You know how private we are about these things. Did you do something?" I kept quiet for a beat, long enough for her nerves to spill out. "Your father is furious, Jack. This is a family matter. We can't have outsiders listening in. Why would the lawyer?" "Maybe," I cut her off. "He thought it was important that everyone be on the same page." Transparent. The sharp inhale on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Mom hated losing control. She preferred quiet decisions, closed-door talks, whispered deals in the kitchen while the rest of us sat in the living room. Transparency was never part of the family playbook. We'll talk about this later, she said, voice clipped. Don't do anything reckless. But that was the thing. I hadn't done anything reckless yet. Not really. Later that day, I stopped by their house to return a casserole dish I'd borrowed at Thanksgiving. The air was icy the moment I stepped inside. Dad didn't even say hello, just sat in his chair glaring at the TV like it had wronged him. Mom folded her arms and dove straight in. We heard from the lawyer, she said. We told him to cancel whatever foolishness he's planning online. This is a private family matter. I leaned against the doorway, raising an eyebrow. Private? Like how you all decided who gets what without even looping me in. That set Dad off. He turned in his chair, pointing the carving knife he was holding straight at me like I was the turkey this time. Watch your tone. Your brother has responsibilities. A wife. Kids. The cabin suits him better. You're single. You don't even use it half the time. My jaw tightened. That's because I'm the one keeping it standing so everyone else can enjoy it. Do you think the dock fixes itself? Dad waved me off like I was being ridiculous. You're overreacting. This isn't about repairs. It's about family. Mark needs the space. You'll have the house. What more do you want? I wanted to yell, to shake them, to ask how many more years I had to play the reliable background character before they saw me as anything else. But all I said was, guess it's good the will reading is coming up. Then we'll know for sure. Mom's lips pressed into a hard line. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Jack. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. The week that followed was a blur of little cuts that stung more than they should have. Mark posted a picture on Facebook of his kids playing in the snow at the cabin with the caption, "Making memories at our place." Jenna commented under it, "Love that you finally claimed it." Mom and Dad both hit like. I didn't say anything, but when I saw those words, "our place," my stomach twisted so hard I had to set the phone down. A couple days later, Jenna called me out of nowhere. "Hey," she said, voice casual in that fake way. "Just wanted to let you know Mom's been a little stressed about everything. Maybe tell the lawyer to cool it. Mark says it's not worth the drama." I laughed bitterly. Of course he did. He's getting exactly what he wants. Jenna sighed. "Jack, don't be like this. He has the kids. You can always visit the cabin. No one's shutting you out." "That's exactly what you're doing," I shot back. "You're all making decisions about me without me even in the room." Silence hung for a moment before she said, "You've always been so dramatic. This isn't about you. It's about what's best for the family." And there it was, the line that always shut me down. What's best for the family? Which really meant, sit down and take it, Jack. Don't rock the boat. That night, I found myself steering the car toward the cabin, partly because I needed to clear my head and partly because I wanted to remind myself why that place mattered so much. Snow was already falling by the time I pulled in, and the driveway was still buried from the last storm. I trudged through the knee-high drifts until I reached the porch. Inside, the air was exactly as I remembered it, cedar wood, pine cleaner, and that faint trace of my grandfather's pipe tobacco that seemed to live in the walls forever. I drifted from room to room, running my hands along the old furniture, pausing at the photos on the walls, and even stopping at the corner of the living room where the carpet still bore the scorch mark I'd left when I lit a sparkler at 12. Then I stood at the window, staring out at the frozen lake, and for the first time in years, I felt something sharp cut through me. Not just hurt, anger. The kind that doesn't soften with a good night's sleep, but lingers and builds until it can't be contained. The next morning, back in town, I walked into the lawyer's office. I wasn't there to stir things up. Not yet. I just wanted answers. And what I heard turned my stomach. My parents had been in the month before to revise their estate plan, streamlining it, as the lawyer put it, by naming Mark as the primary beneficiary of the cabin. The older will had split everything evenly among the three of us. The new version? I got the house, Jenna got a trust payout, and Mark walked away with the cabin plus most of the liquid assets. "Did you sign off on this?" the lawyer asked. I laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "No, no one even told me." His brow furrowed. "That's odd. They said you were aware." I thanked him and walked out, my head spinning. The drive home was a blur, broken only by two buzzing texts from Mark. One was a photo of him lounging by the fireplace at the cabin with the caption, "Home Sweet Home." The other was just 3 words. "You good, bro?" I didn't answer, because in that moment, I knew this wasn't about being hurt anymore. I was finished. If they wanted to play a game of control, they were about to find out I'd been preparing for one longer than they ever realized. I flipped my phone face down and spent that night pacing my apartment like a restless animal, replaying everything. The secret will changes, the smug way Mark had brushed me off at dinner, the way everyone acted like I should just accept it. I barely slept, and by morning, I'd made myself a vow. I wasn't going to let them blindside me again. If my family wanted to treat me like an afterthought, then I was done pretending we were all on the same page. A few days later, the betrayal hit me harder than I expected. I was at work when a Facebook notification popped up. Mark had tagged me. Curious, I clicked and nearly dropped my phone. There he was, standing with his wife in front of the cabin, holding a set of keys, grinning for the camera. The caption read, "Officially ours. So grateful to Mom and Dad for making this happen. Can't wait to build more memories with the kids." The comments section was overflowing. Friends, neighbors, relatives showering them with congratulations and heart emojis. And at the bottom of it all, my name was tagged like some kind of witness to my own public humiliation. I shot him a text immediately. "Me, what is this?" "Mark, what do you mean? Thought you'd be happy we finally made it official." "Me, official? As in legal?" "Mark, yeah. Mom and Dad signed the transfer last week. We've got the deed in hand. Don't worry, you'll still get the house when the time comes." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. They hadn't even waited for the will to be read. They had already handed him the cabin. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening, I was practically vibrating with anger. Mom opened the door with a smile, acting like nothing was wrong, like we were just about to sit down for tea. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to slice through steel. Mom frowned. "Tell you what, that you already signed the cabin over to Mark." Her face hardened instantly. "Jack, lower your voice. This isn't the time for dramatics." "Are you serious?" I snapped, my tone rising no matter how hard I tried to hold it back. "You went behind my back, changed the will, signed over the property, and you didn't think I deserved to know?" Dad appeared in the hallway, his face twisted with irritation. "We didn't go behind your back. This was a family decision. You don't have kids. You don't need the cabin like Mark does." I stepped closer, heat burning in my chest. "So my whole childhood, those summers the first spent fixing that place, those weekends I gave up to make sure it stayed together, none of that counts? You just decided I didn't matter?" Mom reached for my arm, but I pulled away. "Jack, you're blowing this out of proportion. This was always the plan. We just made it official." My throat felt tight as I forced out the words. "No, it was your plan, not mine. You never once asked me what I wanted." That's when Mark and his wife walked in, laughing at something on her phone. When they spotted me, Mark raised an eyebrow. "Whoa, this about the cabin? You still mad over that?" The way he tossed out the word mad, like I was throwing a childish tantrum, made my blood boil. "This isn't about being mad," I said through clenched teeth. "This is about respect. You all decided I didn't even deserve a say." Mark shrugged like it was nothing. "Look, man, you're getting the house. That's worth more than the cabin anyway. I don't see the problem." "The problem," I shot back, "is that you think money equals meaning. That cabin was the one place that ever felt like home. But sure, keep posting your photos, play pretend, act like you earned it." I didn't wait for his reply. I turned on my heel and slammed the door so hard behind me that the windows rattled. Driving home, I felt hollow. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a line carved in stone. My parents had made their choice. Mark had made his. And I was the expendable one. That night, Jenna called. Her voice was low, almost apologetic, like she already knew how bad things had gotten. "Hey," she said softly. "I know you're upset, but maybe just let this go. Mom's been crying. Dad's blood pressure's up. It's not worth the stress." I laughed bitterly. Not worth the stress for who? For them. They get to sleep soundly while I sit here, knowing I've been written out of my own family's story. She hesitated. "It's just, you've always been the strong one, Jack. You've always been the one who could handle disappointment." Something inside me cracked at that. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Maybe that's the problem." For the next week, I barely spoke to anyone. I went to work, came home, and sat in silence. But the silence didn't weaken me, it sharpened me. The will reading was still on the calendar for the following week. And even though the cabin was gone, there were other accounts, other assets, other choices left to settle. If they wanted to turn this into a game, then maybe it was time I started playing, too, on my own terms. The night after the blow-up, I sat in my apartment with nothing but the hum of the refrigerator filling the air. No TV, No music, just me and that emptiness pressing in. I'd never felt so erased, like the oxygen had been sucked right out of the room. I kept replaying the moment Mark and his wife strolled in, laughing, holding those keys like they'd just scored a vacation rental. The image twisted my gut. I'd always known Mark had a smug streak, but this was different. He was reveling in the fact I'd been cut out. Over the next few days, I tried throwing myself into work, but even that felt hollow. My boss noticed. She pulled me aside once and asked gently if everything was okay. I almost laughed in her face, because how could I explain that my family had just stripped me of the only place that ever really felt like mine? Instead of eating lunch with coworkers, I started going for long drives, just me and the road, trying to outrun the storm brewing inside me. More often than not, I'd end up cruising out to the lake, parking along the edge of the property far enough back that Mark wouldn't spot me if he happened to be there, and I'd just sit in the car staring at the frozen shoreline. One afternoon, I saw his SUV out front, and through the window, I could make out his kids tearing around the living room, laughing like only kids can. For a moment, I gripped the steering wheel and felt heat crawl up my neck. Then I forced a long breath because none of this was on the kids. They were just playing, doing what kids do. But that didn't blunt the sting in my chest. That night, Mom texted me, "Mom, family dinner Sunday. Please come. Let's just be together and put this tension behind us." And the phrasing made it sound like sitting at the same table could erase what they'd done. When Sunday rolled around, I almost skipped it, but some stubborn part of me needed to see whether they'd truly act like everything was fine. The second I walked into my parents' house, I knew I'd made a mistake. The place smelled like roast chicken and garlic. Mom's go-to comfort spread, and everybody was there. Mark and his wife, Jenna, even Grandma, all smiling except me. "Jack," Mom chirped, like she hadn't spent 2 weeks cutting me out of the picture. "We saved you a seat." I sat down and kept quiet for 10 minutes while Mark held court about his cabin plans, knocking out a wall for an open layout, adding a hot tub, maybe renting it on weekends for passive income, he said with a grin. And the table showered him with praise about how clever he was and what a head for business he had. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste metal until Jenna finally turned to me and said, "You've been quiet, Jack. What's new with you?" I forced a small smile and said, "Not much, just staying busy." And nobody pushed, nobody asked if I was all right. Nobody acknowledged the elephant parked between the mashed potatoes and the salad bowl. After dinner, I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection, tight face, pale, almost like a stranger, and whispered, "What are you doing?" When I stepped back out, I overheard Mom in the kitchen telling Mark, "He'll be fine. Jack's always been independent. He doesn't need as much as the rest of us." And those words landed like a punch. He doesn't need as much as the rest of us. I slipped out the front door without saying goodbye, and on the drive home something inside me shifted. This wasn't only about the cabin anymore. It was about them deciding who I was and who I wasn't without ever asking. The next morning I woke up with an odd kind of clarity. If I kept waiting for them to see my side, I'd be waiting forever. So I started making quiet moves. First, I opened all the shared accounts. Over the years, I'd covered little things for my folks. Property taxes on the cabin when money was tight, a handful of utility bills, even a new water heater 2 winters back, so they wouldn't touch their savings. And I shut it all down, canceled the autopays, removed my name wherever it appeared. If they wanted me to be a background character, fine, they could handle the load without me. Then I booked another meeting with the lawyer, and this time I didn't just ask casual questions. I listened carefully, requested copies of every document with my name on it, and asked for a full accounting of how the estate was structured right now. He hesitated, clearly aware of the tension, but legally he had to hand it over, and I walked out with a manila folder under my arm that made everything feel brutally real. For the first time in weeks, I slept straight through the night, but the calm didn't stick. 2 days before the reading, a group text from Mom popped up. "Mom, reminder that the reading is Friday at 2 p.m. Dress nicely. This is an important moment for the family." That's what Mom's group text said. An important moment for the family. I stared at it for a long time, typing out a reply and then deleting it. Instead, I kept thinking about something the lawyer had mentioned almost offhand during our last meeting. He'd said, "You know, it's unusual to have a reading streamed live, but with so many interested parties, it might be the best way to keep things transparent." At the time, I just nodded. But now Now, it didn't sound crazy. Maybe transparency was exactly what we needed. Something in me shifted after I walked out of his office with that manila folder. It wasn't just a stack of papers. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't imagining things. Proof that choices had been made without me. Proof that my anger had weight. Holding those documents felt like holding the receipts for my own life. In the days that followed, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I stopped checking social media for cabin photos. I stopped replaying old arguments in my head. I stopped waiting for apologies I knew would never come. Instead, I focused on what I could control. The first step was money. I'd always been careful with finances, saved more than I spent, invested quietly while the rest of them lived by splurge now, worry later. When I looked over my accounts, I realized I was in a much stronger position than I'd ever thought. That realization sparked something. I wiped out the last of my student loans, refinanced my car, and moved a healthy chunk into a high-yield account. Boring on the surface, maybe, but every move felt like I was reclaiming another piece of myself. Then, almost impulsively, I tackled a career change I'd been dodging for years. I'd been stuck in the same unfulfilling job since my mid-20s, coasting. 2 weeks earlier, a recruiter had messaged me about a role at a tech firm in the next city over. Better pay, better benefits, actual growth. I'd ignored it then, but now, I called back. The interviews flew by, and before the week was out, an offer sat in my inbox, 30% more than I was making. I accepted without hesitation. Suddenly, things that used to feel out of reach seemed possible. I looked around my apartment, the place I'd always treated like a temporary stop, and decided it was time for something real. I started touring condos and found one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. I put in an offer. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just getting by, I was building something. Strangely, as my days filled with work and condo paperwork, the family drama started to feel less suffocating. I still thought about the cabin, but not with the same heaviness. If anything, it became fuel. Every step forward was my quiet way of saying, "You don't get to define me." And then came the discovery that changed everything. One afternoon, I drove out to the cabin one last time. Partly for closure, partly because I wanted to see it before Mark started swinging hammers and dropping hot tubs in the yard. As I wandered through the rooms, my eyes fell on something I hadn't thought about in years. A small safe tucked in the back of the master bedroom closet. It had been there since my grandfather's time, rarely touched afterward. I tried the combination, his birthday, and to my surprise, it clicked open. Inside were old deeds, faded photographs, and a thick envelope labeled instructions for executor. I sat on the floor and opened it. The pages were in my grandfather's handwriting, outlining his wish that the cabin remain a shared space for the whole family, preserved and passed down for future generations. I couldn't believe what I was holding in my hands. My parents had gone completely against my grandfather's wishes by handing the cabin over to Mark outright. When I brought the documents to the lawyer the next day, he raised his eyebrows. "This doesn't legally override their current decision," he said carefully, "but it does provide strong context if you wanted to challenge the transfer." A challenge. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I actually smiled, not out of spite, but because I realized I finally had leverage. I didn't file anything right away. Instead, I asked the lawyer to hang on to the papers and prepare a formal summary in case we needed to present them. He nodded and said, "If you want this heard, the will reading would be the moment." That night I sat down at my computer and poured everything out. Every memory tied to that cabin. Every repair I'd done. Every dime I'd put into it. I attached receipts, photographs, even screenshots of texts from Mom thanking me for covering bills. It wasn't about trying to prove I was the better child. It was about showing that I'd been there all along, contributing, caring, keeping the place alive while everyone else just enjoyed it. By the time I was done, I had a thick digital file that told the full story. Friday came, and instead of dreading the will reading, I found myself eager for it. As I ironed my shirt that morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror and hardly recognized myself. I looked sharper, more put together. The haunted look I'd seen at that family dinner was gone. I wasn't the quiet, overlooked brother anymore. I was ready to stand my ground. When I pulled into the lawyer's office parking lot, Mark's SUV was already there. Through the glass doors, I saw him laughing with Mom and Dad, like this was some kind of victory lap. But walking inside, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the kid they used to talk over at the dinner table. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had the upper hand. We all sat down around the long mahogany table, and I caught Mom eyeing me carefully, maybe sensing something different in the way I carried myself. I just smiled, because this time I was ready. The will reading was only hours away, but instead of being nervous, I felt calm, focused, sharper than I had in months. For weeks, I'd been reacting to every slight, letting them knock me around like a pinball. But now I was steering the game. Before heading over, I'd stopped at a small cafe near my apartment and opened my laptop. I wanted to review the folder one last time. Photos of the dock I'd rebuilt, Home Depot receipts from all the weekends I gave up to keep the place standing, invoices I'd paid, even screenshots of Mom's texts thanking me while they were off on vacation. Going through it, I felt stronger with every scroll. It was a record of everything they'd conveniently chosen to forget. Then I opened an email from the lawyer's office. There it was, the livestream link. It wasn't just for immediate family. Technically, anyone named in the will could tune in, even distant cousins or a couple of family friends who'd been left small gifts. And that gave me an idea. My parents had always controlled the narrative. They decided what got shared with relatives, what stayed quiet, what stories got told at family reunions. They made sure the outside world saw a picture-perfect family, no matter what was crumbling behind closed doors. But this time, I wasn't going to let them dictate the story. I spent the next hour sending careful messages to a handful of people. My uncle, who'd always had my back. My grandfather's old fishing buddy, who still called me every Christmas. Even a couple of cousins from out of state who had grown up spending summers at the cabin. I didn't say much in those messages, just that the will reading was happening today. Here was the link, and they might want to tune in. When I showed up at the lawyer's office, I was early. The conference room was silent, the polished wood table gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I took a seat near the end, opened my laptop, and waited. A few minutes later, the lawyer came in, gave me a nod, and said, "Everything's set up. Streaming will begin once everyone is here." One by one, the rest of them arrived. Mark strolled in first, wearing a blazer and grinning like he was at some award show. His wife followed, coffee in hand, eyes glued to her phone. Mom and Dad came in together, calm but purposeful, like they were about to finalize some business deal. Once everyone was settled, the lawyer started with the usual formalities, laying out how the session would work and reminding everyone that it was being streamed for all relevant parties. I saw Mom stiffen slightly at the mention of the stream, but she stayed quiet with the camera rolling. As the lawyer read through the will, I studied their faces carefully. Most of the bequests were simple, some antique furniture for Jenna, a donation in Grandma's name, a few accounts to be split evenly. Then came the cabin. As per the amended estate plan, he read, the property located on Lakeshore Road is hereby transferred to Mark Walker. Full ownership, free and clear. Mark's grin spread wider, his shoulders pulling back like he'd just been crowned king. But I didn't flinch. I waited until the lawyer finished that section before I spoke. "Excuse me," I said evenly, "but I have some additional context I'd like entered into the record." Every head turned toward me. Mom's eyes narrowed. "Jack," she hissed, "this isn't the time." With respect, the lawyer cut in. "Mr. Walker has the right to submit any relevant documents pertaining to the estate." I slid the folder across the table. "This is a record of every repair, every payment, every contribution I've made to the cabin over the past 10 years. It also includes a letter from my late grandfather, where he outlines his original intent for the property, to remain a shared family space, preserved for future generations." The lawyer flipped it open, his eyebrows climbing. "This is substantial." Mark shifted in his seat. "What's your point, Jack?" "My point," I said, keeping my voice steady, "is that these decisions were made under the assumption I was aware and in agreement. I was neither. And now that the entire family is watching this stream, I think they deserve to know how it really played out." Mom's face drained of color. Dad cleared his throat like he wanted to jump in, but the lawyer raised a hand. "Mr. Walker, these documents raise serious questions about intent and contribution. While the transfer is legally binding, this may warrant further review." The room went quiet, the tension thick enough to choke on. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from my uncle. "Asterisk, just watched you speak up. About time someone said it. Call me after. We need to talk." Asterisk, I looked at the screen and felt a slow satisfaction settle in. For years I'd been the quiet one, the easy one, The one they never worried about because they figured I'd just accept whatever they decided. Not anymore. I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was rewriting the script. And this was only the beginning. The silence in that room stretched so long I could hear the faint hum of the streaming equipment. The lawyer kept scanning my documents, nodding slowly, while my parents sat stiff and frozen. "This is significant," he said again. "It doesn't nullify the transfer, but it provides a strong basis for revisiting the terms, especially given the decedent's written statement about shared ownership." Mark scoffed. "Come on. We've already signed the deed. This is just Jack being dramatic because he didn't get what he wanted." I didn't take the bait. I leaned back in my chair and said, "That's one interpretation. Another is that I've been quietly footing bills and putting in sweat equity for a decade, thinking this was a shared family space, only to find out I was left holding the bag while you got the keys." For a second, Mark actually looked rattled. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mark's grin faltered. "What does that mean?" "It means," the lawyer said evenly, "you may not be able to move forward with renovations, rentals, or any sale until the dispute is resolved." I didn't smile, but inside I felt something settle into place. Step 1. After the reading, as everyone shuffled out, I caught the eye of the streaming camera one last time. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. I think it's important that we all understand how decisions like this affect the family. If you have questions, I'll be happy to share the documents with you. Mom's face flushed crimson. She waited until we were in the hallway to hiss, "How dare you air this in front of everyone?" I met her glare without flinching. "How dare you pretend this was fair?" I left them there and didn't look back. That night, I called my uncle, answering the text he'd sent. When he picked up, his voice was steady. "Jack, I'm proud of you for speaking up. Your grandfather would have wanted you to. He hated the idea of that place becoming someone's private retreat." We talked for almost an hour. By the end, he offered to back me if I challenged the transfer. "I can testify about what your grandfather told me," he said. "And I've got photos from all those summers you and I were the only ones up there fixing things. This family's memory is selective, but mine isn't." I thanked him, and when we hung up, I felt something new, momentum. Over the next week, I gathered everything. The lawyer's notes, my uncle's statement, even old emails from my grandfather that I dug out of an ancient inbox. Then I drafted a formal letter to my parents and Mark, laying out my intent to contest the transfer and requesting mediation before anything further was done with the cabin. When I sent it, I braced for a fight, but what I got was silence. Days passed, then a week. Finally, Mom called. "Jack," she said softly, "is this really what you want? To drag the family into a legal battle?" "What I want," I answered, calm and steady, "is for this to be handled the way Granddad intended. If that means mediation, so be it. If that means court, so be it. But I won't be erased." She let out a long sigh. "You're not being erased." "Yes," I said quietly. "I was." That was the last time we spoke before the mediation. On the day of the meeting, I walked into the neutral conference room wearing my new suit, a small detail, but one that made me feel stronger, like I was stepping in as a man in control, not the kid they'd always dismissed. Mark was already there, looking irritated, tapping his foot like the whole thing was beneath him. My parents sat side by side, weary and guarded. The mediator opened by asking each of us to state our position. Mark jumped in first, insisting the transfer was final and that I was just bitter over losing my favorite vacation spot. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I laid out every fact in clear, measured words. The payments I'd made, the repairs I'd done, the letter from my grandfather, the photos, then my uncle's sworn statement. "This isn't about money," I finished. "It's about respect. I want the cabin treated as what it was meant to be, a shared family space. If that means setting up a trust to manage it, fine. If it means selling and splitting the proceeds evenly, fine. But I won't stand by while it becomes one person's private asset, built on my time and labor." The room fell silent. The mediator nodded slowly. "That's a very reasonable position. Mark, do you have a response?" For once, he didn't have a clever comeback.